Today's my birthday, and usually, that means one thing: barbecue. It's kind of our family tradition. We invite close friends, relatives, and the usual neighborhood crew. But this year felt different. A little too grand, honestly. We brought in extra grills and even a couple of smokehouses to handle all the food. Even though it was my day, I ended up doing most of the cooking. I'll admit, I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but the food turned out pretty good. Not amazing, but definitely edible. One of the perks of manning the grill was that I always had a cold beer in my left hand, keeping me cool while I sweated over the meat. At some point, someone asked me if I wanted my birthday gift right then or if I preferred to wait until the evening. I was about to answer when I heard the shower running upstairs. That's when my wife, Natalie, peeked out of the bathroom door, gave me that big smile of hers, and told me she'd see me tonight. I headed downstairs to check on the boys. Our oldest, Mason, he just turned 18, was getting ready to leave for college in Texas. And then there's Dylan, a year younger, already locked in with a scholarship to Auburn. Solid kids. I've got Natalie to thank for most of that. I tried to give them a comfortable, steady home to grow up in, but looking back, I sometimes wish I'd been a little more emotionally available. We were out on the back patio making sure everything was just right: clean yard, tidy terrace, that sort of thing. Then we got to grilling. Mason handled the smokehouse like a pro, especially with the ribs. Dylan was in charge of seasoning, and the kids got a great touch. With them around, I almost didn't need to lift a finger. Natalie joined us after we got things going. Her two sisters showed up to help too. With over 50 guests on the list, it was no small gathering. Funny how people always come out of the woodwork when there's free food. I'm turning 40 this year, but deep down, I still feel like I'm in my 20s. Next month, Natalie and I will hit our 20th wedding anniversary. 2 decades. It hasn't always been fireworks and fairy tales, but we've built a good life. Things cooled off a bit after she started working again about a year ago, probably her way of coping with the idea of an empty nest. We didn't need the money, but I think she missed having adult conversations during the day. I was okay with that, as long as she was happy. After we finished with the yard work, the boys and I showered and changed. My mom had dropped off a new shirt for me earlier in the week. Not really my style, kinda loud, like something a Hawaiian lounge singer would wear, but I wore it anyway. Natalie made the smart call to throw an apron over it, which honestly made the whole look a little more bearable. Guests started rolling in, bringing food, gifts, and enough soda to flood a small town. The weather was perfect, sunny, with a breeze, and it felt like one of those days you want to bottle up and remember. Natalie, as always, looked stunning. She's turning 40 next year, but you'd never guess it. Still looks like she's in her early 30s. I couldn't wait for the two of us to sneak away on some exotic vacations once the boys were off to college. Time to reconnect, relax, and maybe even fall in love all over again. I watched her float from table to table, checking on guests and making sure everything was just right. She looked like the picture of grace and hospitality, the kind of woman who makes you feel proud just being next to her. I honestly thought to myself, man, what more could I ask for? Soon enough, everyone was digging in. Plates were piling up and disappearing just as fast. Most folks brought their own chairs, which saved us from a seating disaster. We had 2 massive coolers, one packed with beer, the other with soda, and the cake was chilling safely in the kitchen, waiting for its big entrance. That's when I noticed someone I didn't recognize. A tall guy in a dark blue jacket, standing right on the edge of the yard. He said something to one of our neighbors, and then the neighbor waved Natalie over. The man handed her an envelope from inside his coat. She took it, thanked him, and he said something I couldn't hear. Then he walked away. No fuss. No explanation. Natalie just stood there, frozen. She looked at the envelope, then looked at me. Her face went blank, completely unreadable. And then, without saying a word, she turned around and walked straight into the house. I just stood there, quietly watching as the whole scene unfolded. The buzz of conversation that had filled the yard only minutes earlier faded into low murmurs, soft whispers, like everyone could feel something wasn't right. Trying to cut through the heavy tension, I raised my voice and called out, "Hey, if anyone wants more ribs, help yourself." It wasn't much, but it gave people something else to focus on. A few moments later, Mason and Dylan slowly walked over, both of them clearly confused. Dylan asked what was going on. I had no real answer, I just shrugged. Mason started to head toward the house, probably to check on Natalie, but I gently reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. I shook my head and suggested he check the coolers instead, see if we needed more drinks or beer. I just needed them distracted, for now. Gradually, the chatter picked back up around the yard. People started talking again, laughing, albeit a little forced, and I felt the smallest bit of relief. But it didn't last. About 10 minutes later, just as I was starting to figure out how I'd talk to Natalie, Dylan came running over, clearly alarmed. "Dad," he said, "Mom's leaving, in the Mustang." He pointed toward the front of the house. I turned just in time to see my black Mustang convertible speeding down the street, fast. Too fast. Everyone else in the backyard turned to look. The whole party went dead silent. It was a weird sight. Natalie never drove the Mustang, that was my car. She usually took the minivan. But there she was, flying down the road, and in that moment, it was like the entire day cracked open. She was gone. And no one knew why. Her sudden exit left a vacuum. I had questions, so many questions, but I knew none of them would be answered until she came back. If she came back. A few minutes later, her sister Lily showed up with the cake. I tried my best to smile, to pretend everything was okay, but Natalie's absence was like a dark cloud hanging over everything. The mood had shifted. The joy was gone. One by one, guests started saying their goodbyes. Neighbors, friends, some gave me odd looks, others offered awkward words of encouragement. Close family lingered a bit longer, but eventually even they left. We cleaned up. Packed things away. There wasn't much left to do. No one talked about Natalie leaving. Not really. It was like we all agreed not to speak it into existence. As if staying silent would somehow undo what had happened. That night, it was just me and the boys in the house. The quiet was deafening. They kept looking at me, waiting for something, an explanation, a sign, anything. But I had nothing. No clue, no answers, just a hollow pit in my chest where my certainty used to be. They went to bed eventually, but I couldn't move. I sat there on the couch all night, unmoving, lost in thought. By morning I hadn't slept. Mason and Dylan woke up early and took it upon themselves to return the borrowed grills and gear to the neighbors. I appreciated that more than I could say. They didn't press me, they just handled it, like they sensed I needed space. The smell of fresh coffee eventually pulled me off the couch, but it didn't last long. Natalie still wasn't home. Still no word. No message. Whatever was in that envelope, it must have been serious. Serious enough to make her walk out in the middle of my birthday party. I tried calling her over and over, but of course, her phone was off. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I was stuck in my head, going over every possible scenario, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. After the boys returned from making their rounds, they quietly left again, probably to give me more space. I was grateful. I took a long, scalding shower, hoping it would clear my head, but it only helped for a moment. That's when it hit me, it was Sunday. Nothing would move today. No progress, no updates. Still, I started thinking, maybe I should go to the police. I didn't know any officers personally, but I had a few casual acquaintances who worked down at the courthouse. Maybe they could point me in the right direction. Give me advice. Help me figure out what to do next. Natalie and I shared one credit card and one debit card. The debit card was for our everyday stuff, groceries, gas, little things here and there. The credit card? That was for the bigger purchases. We always tried to pay both off in full each month. That was the plan, at least. If Natalie had gotten into some kind of trouble, I figured those cards would be the first clue. Credit card charges usually take a couple of days to show up, but debit card transactions? They're basically instant. So, feeling a pit in my stomach, I pulled up our bank accounts and checked the credit card first. Nothing. No new charges, no red flags. But when I flipped over to the debit card, that's when things started making sense, and not in a good way. About 2 hours after she left, Natalie had used the debit card to fill up the tank at a gas station in Pennsylvania, just past the Ohio state line. 2 hours after that, another fuel stop, this time in Illinois. Then the last recorded transaction hit me like a brick, an ATM withdrawal in Cedar Rapids. $1,300 in cash. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing my third cup of coffee, and the truth smacked me square in the face: she wasn't coming back. This wasn't Natalie taking a breather or going to cool off somewhere for a night. She was running. Heading west. And fast. And that realization hit hard. I loved her, I still do, but how could I support her when she was clearly running away? From me, from our life, from something. It tore me up inside, realizing that our marriage might be sitting right on the edge of collapse. Even though it was Sunday, I didn't wait. I called the bank and canceled both cards. Took less than 10 minutes. About an hour later, I went down to the local police station. I reported the Mustang as stolen, but I didn't mention that it was my wife who took it. Instead, I told them a gas card left inside had been used in multiple states, which suggested the car was headed west. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the only way I could think to get their attention. Sadly, they didn't seem too interested. Treated me more like a guy who lost his keys than someone whose life had just cracked open. After that, I walked through the house and started doing a mental inventory, trying to figure out what else she might have taken. Only her purse and a small overnight bag were missing. That was it. It made everything feel even weirder. What could she have packed in just one small bag that justified driving halfway across the country? I stared at her phone for a while, debating whether to shut it off too. I figured maybe if she noticed it wasn't working, she'd have to call. Maybe she'd finally explain what was going on. That hope felt pathetic, but it was all I had. Hours passed. I didn't even realize I'd skipped lunch. By the time I looked at the clock, it was already pushing dinner time. Mason and Dylan came home with a couple pizzas, even though we still had a ton of food left over from the barbecue. And damn, those greasy, salty slices never tasted so good. We sat down together and talked it all through. I told them everything I knew, every transaction, every guess, every gut feeling. They listened. No judgment. Just quiet support. That night, I finally crawled into bed. It wasn't restful sleep, but at least I wasn't stuck on the couch. By the next morning, it was pretty clear, Natalie wasn't planning to reach out. No call, no text. Just silence. Meanwhile, the boys had started summer jobs at a local tree trimming company. Tough work, but they were excited about it. Gave them purpose. And maybe even a bit of escape from all the mess at home. I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching them pull away in the Jeep. I waved them off, holding back the ache in my chest. Once they were gone, the silence settled in again. The house felt empty. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. Eventually, I made the call to my boss. Told him I needed a week off to deal with some personal stuff. No questions asked? He understood. The truth was, the job had become routine anyway. I drove gravel back and forth from the quarry. Decent pay, but nothing glamorous. I'd spend the day drenched in sweat, covered in dust, hauling load after load. The one upside? No decisions. Just follow orders, deliver, repeat. Back when Natalie first started working at Prescott Casualty, she used to drag me to company events, barbecues, family days, company picnics. I got to meet her coworkers, shake a few hands, and play the supportive husband role. It wasn't always fun, but it made her happy. But thinking back now, it had been at least 6 months since she even mentioned a company event. No invites. No reminders. No stories from work. It was like that whole part of her life had just disappeared. I've never been great with names or faces, but I did remember Jack and Margie Gilson. Jack was a skilled carpenter, and Margie worked in the same office as Natalie at Prescott Casualty. I needed answers, anything, so I decided to give the company a call. Margie answered the phone, and I greeted her politely. "Hey Margie, it's Liam Connor. Got a minute to talk?" She sounded flustered, like she had a million things going on. "Liam, hey. I'm really slammed right now. Is this urgent?" I hesitated for a second, not sure how to even begin. I was wondering if Natalie made it into work today." Her answer caught me completely off guard. "They weren't expecting her today," she said flatly. That threw me. "Wait, why not?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a long pause on the other end, and that silence said more than words ever could. I could feel her discomfort through the phone. "Liam, I really don't think I should be talking about this with you," she finally said, her voice low. "Maybe you should talk to your wife about it." I let out a sigh. "I'd love to, Margie. But I don't even know where she is." Another beat of silence. "I'm sorry, Liam. I really have to get back to work," she added quickly, then hung up before I could say anything else. I just sat there, stunned, holding the phone in my hand like it might ring again. That call left me with a sick feeling in my gut. Something was off at Prescott Casualty, something Natalie was clearly hiding from me. Suddenly it all clicked. The reason we'd stopped going to her office parties and picnics. She was afraid someone might say something. Maybe spill a little too much and let something slip that I wasn't supposed to know. Still processing it all, I grabbed a cold beer and headed out to the porch. I needed air. I needed a moment to think. Looking back now, I can see the red flags. They were there all along, but I ignored them. Just little things that didn't seem worth worrying about at the time. One of the first signs was how often she started working late. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Overtime happens. But then it became regular. Routine. And she stopped talking about her job. Completely. It used to be our dinner conversation, little stories from the office, her coworkers, stuff like that. But lately? Nothing. We stopped seeing her coworkers, too. No more invites. No one dropping by. It was like she cut that part of her life off from me, brick by brick. Still, it didn't seem like the usual signs of an affair. She hadn't changed her wardrobe. No new clothes, no perfume, nothing flashy. And I never saw her sneaking around on her phone or hiding emails. At home, she was still Natalie. Sweet, affectionate, loving. Our connection was still there. Our love life hadn't disappeared. But none of that erased the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I needed help, someone I could trust. That's when I thought of Donald Curry, an old high school buddy. He worked over at the courthouse and knew his way around a computer. I wasn't totally sure what his job was, but I figured if anyone could dig into things, it'd be him. I called him up, explained the basics, and he agreed to meet me after work at a place called the Glass Door. We'd talk more in person and figure out where to go from there. Before heading out, I also called Ronwell Homebuilders. Jack Gilson, Natalie's coworker, was working on a construction project nearby, some new apartment complex. I figured I'd try to talk to him around noon. Normally, scarfing down a burrito from Taco Bell wouldn't be a problem. But today, I barely touched it. My stomach was too tight with nerves. When I pulled up to the construction site, I saw the crew was still on lunch break. Jack spotted me right away and gave a friendly wave as he walked over to my car. His smile was warm, genuine, not like Margie's guarded tone on the phone. "Hey, Liam," he said cheerfully. "Good to see you, man. I'm guessing this is about Natalie?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is." I told Jack I'd spoken to Margie earlier that day, but she'd been tight-lipped. Wouldn't give me anything. I needed answers, and I made it clear. I wanted to talk man to man, no BS. Jack's the kind of guy who doesn't mince words, and I appreciated that. But I also knew that if he tried to sugarcoat things or hide the truth, I wouldn't have the patience for it. He nodded and got serious. Said he usually tuned Margie out when she started rambling about office drama, but there were some things he couldn't ignore. Then he hit me with it. Natalie had been seeing a married man from her office for nearly 6 months. They tried to keep it quiet, but you know how office gossip spreads. Once Margie and the other women caught wind of it, things changed. They noticed I'd stopped showing up at company events and figured out Natalie was deliberately keeping me away. Probably afraid someone would slip up and say too much. Jack apologized. Said he didn't know the guy's name, didn't pay much attention to those details, but if I wanted, he could try to find out. I told him not to worry. I'd handle it. I thanked him for being honest. That was all I needed to hear. The pieces finally clicked together. No more doubt. I'd been blind to what was happening right under my own roof. Frustrated and hurt, I drove home and disconnected Natalie's cell phone. I didn't want her calling the house, at least not until I was ready to hear from her. I had just pulled into the driveway when the house phone rang. It was the Cedar Rapids police. They told me they'd found my Mustang, abandoned in the parking lot of a bus station. It had been towed to the impound lot. I could pick it up anytime, as long as I paid the $1,300 fee. I decided to stop by the police station first, just to get the full story. The report said Natalie had ditched the car and continued her trip by bus. No destination was listed, but I had a hunch she might be heading west. I didn't know anyone she was close to out there, but something told me that's where she was going. To protect myself and the boys, I went straight to the bank. We closed every joint account and opened new ones in my name only. I also updated the insurance policies, making sure both Mason and Dylan were listed as the sole beneficiaries. The next morning, I showed up early at the glass door to meet Donald. I'd had too much to drink the night before and was still feeling it. Not proud of that, especially given everything going on. When Donald arrived, he got straight to the point. There was a divorce hearing that day, something I hadn't expected. Turns out, Natalie was supposed to testify. But she didn't show up. The case involved a woman named Marcia Ridgway. She was divorcing her husband, Kelsey, and wanted Natalie to testify that she was the woman he'd been having an affair with. Without Natalie's testimony, the case would have hit a wall. But it didn't matter. Marcia had already gathered a mountain of evidence: photos, videos, phone recordings. Natalie's confession wasn't even necessary at that point. Apparently, Natalie had once called Marcia just to rub it in, to humiliate her. And it worked. But now, no one gave a damn about Natalie's side. She had nothing left to offer. No leverage. No defense. Her role in the whole mess had become irrelevant. Donald told me that once the evidence was presented, Kelsey folded immediately. He admitted to everything. The judge granted the divorce on the spot. It would be official in 6 months. And Kelsey? He was screwed. 3 kids under 10, and now he owed heavy alimony and child support. His little fling with Natalie was going to cost him big for a long, long time. Donald had to get home to his family, so we wrapped things up. I thanked him for everything, then turned to the bartender and asked for a coffee. For a second, I thought about grabbing one of those bright red pickled eggs from the jar on the counter, but I remembered the leftover ribs at home. I might have had one too many drinks that night, but I made it home safe, no harm done. Still, I knew it had been a stupid move. To ground myself, I started wrapping up 6 ribs in foil and slid them into the oven to warm up. Then I headed for the shower, hoping to wash away some of the day's chaos. When I came back to the kitchen, all that was left were bones. Mason and Dylan had devoured the pork ribs the moment they got home. They teased me with their mouths full, laughing until I pulled another batch out of the oven. Mason was especially excited about the Mustang situation. After a good 20-minute talk, I finally caved and gave them the green light to take a bus to Cedar Rapids and drive the car home. I handed them $1,600 to cover everything: bus tickets, impound fees, and whatever else might come up. Dylan even typed up a document on the computer authorizing them to pick up the vehicle on my behalf. I was honestly impressed by how confident and professional he was about the whole thing. I didn't say much, just signed it. The next morning, we all had breakfast at IHOP before I dropped them off at the bus station. Watching them board that Greyhound, I couldn't help but chuckle. 2 teenagers, off on a 2-day cross-country ride? Definitely a life experience they wouldn't forget. To make sure there were no hiccups, I called the Cedar Rapids Police Department ahead of time and let them know the boys would be arriving to retrieve the car. They confirmed everything was set. With that handled, I turned my attention to the last piece of the puzzle, Kelsey Ridgway. Tracking down his office wasn't easy. When I finally walked in, Margie was the first person I saw. The moment she recognized me, her hand shot for the phone. But I moved fast, too fast for her to make the call. Before I could even process what happened next, I was surrounded by security and hauled out of the building. I didn't fight it. I barely blinked. Next thing I knew, I was standing in front of a judge. There wasn't much conversation. No courtroom drama. Just a few words, and then the sentence, 60 days in county jail. And honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. I called the boys to let them know what happened. I could have sworn I heard Dylan snicker on the other end. That kid always finds the humor in things. Leaving the house unattended for a few days might sound harmless, but real life isn't a sitcom. I had to stay sharp inside. Most of the inmates weren't looking to make friends. A lot of noise, a lot of egos, a lot of young guys trying to prove something. The older, more violent crowd didn't mix much with them. I didn't get a private cell, of course. Ended up sharing with a guy named Joao. He went by Jew. Apparently, he caught his wife with another man and didn't take it well. We never talked details, but I could relate. Jew and I actually got along fine. I claimed the top bunk, which worked out since he hated climbing. The food was carb-heavy, pasta, bread, potatoes, none of which I cared for. Luckily, Jew was more than happy to take the extra portions off my hands. Made him the perfect cellmate. 3 days in, Mason and Dylan came to visit. They told me the trip went smoothly. They got the Mustang, made it home fine, but both agreed they were done with Greyhound for life. They hadn't heard anything new about their mom or Kelsey. But they did bring a gift, 2 boxes of cigarettes. Mason doesn't even smoke, but I guess he figured they'd be good for trade. Probably watched too many prison movies. Jew was thrilled. Said smoking helped him manage the stress, and the weight gain, of being locked up. Knowing the boys were okay brought me some peace. Mason had even left for college a week before I was set to be released. Took the minivan with him, which left the Jeep for Dylan to use during his senior year. When I finally got out, Dylan and I grabbed lunch at Red Lobster. He was excited about finishing school, but I knew he'd have to handle a lot on his own. I had other plans. The next morning, I walked back into Prescott Casualty. When Margie saw me, her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. I gave her a sly wink and marched straight into Kelsey's office like I owned the place. But my victory lap didn't last long. 3 hours later, I was back on a bus, headed for the same jail walls I'd just left. This time, the judge gave me 6 months. Dylan found the whole thing hilarious. First thing he did was call his brother at College Station and fill him in. As for Jew, my reliable cellmate, he welcomed me back like I'd never left. And honestly, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. This time around, I'd managed to get to Kelsey even more directly. And yeah, it felt like I'd finally made an impact. Still, I never heard anything back. No word, no fallout, nothing. So, for all I knew, it might have meant everything, or absolutely nothing. As expected, I lost my job. No surprise there. Luckily, I had enough saved up to cover the mortgage and day-to-day bills. Dylan handled everything back home with impressive maturity. Never missed a beat. On top of that, family started showing up more often, visits here and there. Dylan always made sure I had a steady flow of cigarettes for Jew, my cellmate. Even Natalie's sisters dropped by and offered their sympathy. Nobody ever scolded me or made me feel judged. That meant more than I let on. It had been a long time since I'd heard anything from Natalie. Still, we somehow managed to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas in that tiny, gray prison. It was strange. Not joyful, not tragic, just life continuing. Ju, my dependable cellmate, was released before me. So technically, I didn't lose him. But still, when he left, it hit harder than I expected. His wife and brother had already moved down to Florida, and he didn't really have a plan. Just floated. That's when Dylan stepped up again, offered Ju a place to crash until he got his feet under him. Even tried to line up a job for him at the tree trimming company. But Ju had already made up his mind. Said he was heading south, likely Florida, chasing warm weather and maybe a new start. The night before he left, something strange happened. Kelsey Ridgway showed up at the ER, claiming he'd been attacked in a city alley by a stranger. Weird part? I had a rock-solid alibi. I'd been with Ju the whole night. After I got out of jail, I felt done. Whatever beef I had with Kelsey, it was over. He'd already moved out of the area. I didn't care to chase ghosts. Instead, I put my focus into something new. I enrolled in a course to get certified for driving big rigs. Compared to the dump trucks I'd driven before, it came easy. I found comfort in the simplicity. Since Dylan wasn't starting at Auburn for a few more months, I used the downtime to fix up the house. I thought about selling it, but transferring the deed to my name alone? Way more red tape than I wanted to deal with. Natalie never reached out. Never said where she was, never asked for anything. At one point, Dylan asked if he could take the Mustang with him down to Alabama. I let him. The car didn't really do it for me anymore, but I figured it might help him turn a few heads. He was young, sharp, and unlike me, still had that kind of spark. Eventually, I found a couple who wanted to buy the house. The place still had ghosts, memories and whispers, but they were eager, and the deal was fair. The lawyer assured them Natalie's signature wasn't needed. I didn't argue. I just wanted out, no strings attached. With the down payment, I bought a used drilling rig, one with a sleeper cab. And just like that, I hit the road. For the first time in years, I felt free. Funny enough, I never filed for divorce. Didn't see the point. I wasn't planning on getting married again, and honestly, I doubted Natalie was either. During those long nights in lockup, I'd realized something. The world isn't full of second chances with decent women when you're pushing middle age with prison time under your belt. Besides, Ju used to say love was a young man's game. And he wasn't entirely wrong. Still, I hadn't gotten any divorce papers either. Maybe she felt the same, like we were both just done. Quietly, permanently done. Finding work as a trucker wasn't hard. I wasn't desperate for money, so I could be picky about what I hauled. No frozen goods. No animals. No chemicals or explosives. And I sure as hell avoided driving north of the Mason-Dixon in the winter. It didn't take long to adjust. And to my own surprise, I kind of loved it. Then, one trip took me out to South Dakota. I was hauling some agricultural equipment, nothing unusual. It was early June, so the weather was kind. Cool mornings, warm afternoons. I'd parked for the night, stepped out of the cab, and stretched my legs. And that's when something unexpected happened. I kept heading south, letting the road guide me. At one point, I veered off I-90 for about 5 miles and stumbled across a little joint called Belly Up. The place didn't look like much from the outside, plain signage, faded paint, but the parking lot was packed with semis and pickup trucks. That's always a good sign in my book. Curious, and needing a break, I pulled in. Inside, the diner was buzzing. Locals filled the booths, and a few fellow truckers were hunched over their plates at the counter. Smelled like heaven. Turns out, they served breakfast all day, and when I say the portions were generous, I mean it, they didn't skimp. I ordered my go-to, eggs, sausage, hash browns, and a coffee strong enough to wake the dead. As I settled into my booth, I glanced up at the 3 widescreen TVs mounted around the place. Nobody really seemed to be watching, just background noise, but one of them, closest to me, was playing some political segment. That's when I saw him. Robert something or other, a silver-haired guy with a voice like a used car salesman, and way too much charm for his own good. He was the centerpiece of the piece, smiling, shaking hands, giving speeches. And standing beside him? Natalie. My Natalie. She was dressed like Jackie Kennedy, beaming like a pageant queen, standing next to Robert like she'd always belonged there. I blinked a few times, unsure if the coffee had kicked in or if I was hallucinating. But no, there she was. Same eyes. Same posture. But different, too. Her blonde hair had been dyed a soft chestnut brown, styled to perfection. Her makeup was flawless, and her suit fit her like it was custom-made. Just then, the biggest plate of potatoes I'd ever seen hit the table in front of me. "Here you go, hon," the waitress, Betsy, said with a wink. "You look like you could use the calories. Want some Tabasco?" I nodded. "Yeah, sure." She laughed and reached behind the pepper shaker, revealing the Tabasco bottle like it was a party trick. "I hide it from the tourists," she joked, dousing my food before handing it over. Still rattled, I pointed at the screen. "That woman next to Robert, who is she?" Betsy leaned in and squinted. "Oh, her? That's his new lady. Rumor is, he needed a wife to clean up his image, you know, to squash the rumors." "Arm candy?" I asked. "Something like that. Not sure she's his type, if you know what I mean. But she fits the bill." I chewed my potatoes slowly, processing everything. "She's a little old for arm candy. Time crunch." Betsy shrugged. "Beggars can't be choosers." I laughed under my breath. "Older women make better partners anyway. More substance." Betsy nodded as she wiped down the next booth. "I hear that." I took another glance at the screen. Natalie looked polished, refined, even elegant. Not the woman who'd vanished in a Mustang and left her life behind. This version of her? She looked like she'd rehearsed this new role 1,000 times. Eventually, Betsy drifted back to work. The diner stayed packed, plates clattered, coffee flowed. She came back twice to refill my cup. I cleaned my plate completely. Dessert sounded good, but I was full and more than a little stunned. She cleared the table and left the check. I asked offhand, "So, how's the election going?" Betsy rolled her eyes. "We're doing our damnedest to make sure he loses. But it's tough. He's got big donors, and we've got, well, coffee and potatoes." I chuckled, reaching for my money clip. I guess the smirk on my face gave something away, because Betsy leaned closer and asked, "What's so funny? You know something?" I grinned. "Oh, maybe." Her eyes lit up. "Did they actually get married?" I nodded. "Yeah. Wedding was on TV. Some kind of reality special." She let out a little whistle. "They skipped the honeymoon, though," I added. "Probably waiting for him to get sworn in first." Betsy gave a knowing smirk and didn't say more. I left a 10 on the counter and stood to leave. "Not here to cause trouble," I told her. "Just passing through." As I reached the door, she called after me. "You sure you don't have something to tell me? I could use a story, or at least a good night's sleep." I just smiled and pushed the door open, stepping into the fading afternoon light. Felt good. Sliding into the driver's seat, I reclined just enough to steal a quick nap. I was exhausted, but satisfied. Everything was behind me now. Or so I thought. Just as I started to drift off, a sharp knock rattled the window beside me. Annoyed, I cracked one eye open. At first, I tried to ignore the knocking. Figured if I stayed still long enough, they'd give up and move on. I even grumbled under my breath for whoever it was to take a hint. But the knocking didn't stop, it just got louder and more insistent. Annoyed, I finally gave in. I opened the door with a huff, ready to tell someone off. Standing there in the rain was a stern-looking woman in a raincoat, water dripping from the brim of her hood. I squinted through the dark and wet, trying to make out her face. "I haven't broken any laws," I said flatly. "So unless you've got a warrant, go bug someone else." Unfazed, she replied. Betsy asked me to talk to you. Even with the weather coming down hard, she stood there like it didn't bother her a bit. Said she'd only need a few minutes of my time. I didn't want to deal with this, not after everything, not when all I wanted was some shut-eye. But something in her tone cut through my fatigue. 10 minutes? I told her. No more. She nodded, determined. It's about Amelia. Meet me inside in 10. The second she said her name, my heart stumbled. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked away, that faint, knowing half-smile on her face. She disappeared into the diner, leaving me there, stunned and suddenly wide awake. The place was still buzzing with regulars, laughter and dishes clinking under the fluorescent lights. I hesitated, then decided, what the hell, I'd come this far. Might as well see what she had to say. Near the entrance, there was a corner set up with rain jackets and winter gear, soon to be needed as the seasons changed. I spotted her in a window booth, 2 steaming cups of coffee in front of her. She had straight, jet-black hair with a white streak down one side, almost like lightning. Her skin was sun-bronzed and weathered, not soft like someone who spent her life inside. No makeup, no pretense. Maybe late 30s, early 40s. High cheekbones gave her face a quiet strength. I slid into the booth across from her and offered my hand. Liam Connor. She shook it firmly. Sally Wilmot. I asked if she wanted anything to eat, but she shook her head. Said she'd had the diner's signature dish 3 hours ago and wasn't hungry. Gave a polite smile, then got to the point. Betsy said you might know something about Robert and Amelia. That got my attention. Why do you care about Amelia? I asked. My brother Kevin is running against Robert, she said, her voice tinged with something personal. She explained further, this wasn't just politics for her. Kevin represented their neighborhood, a community that felt increasingly left behind. They believed if Robert won, the little guys didn't stand a chance. I nodded, still confused. Okay, but what does his wife have to do with any of this? Sally looked down at her cup, then back at me. That's what we're trying to figure out. Something about her feels off. We've tried to look into her background, but it's like she doesn't exist before a few years ago. Robert's team won't say a word. We don't know if it's nothing, or something big. But Betsy said you might know more? I let out a small chuckle. Betsy talks too much. She's observant, Sally countered. And you've got that poker face. But I can tell you know something. I leaned back, took a slow sip of my coffee. Then I set the cup down and looked her in the eyes. You want answers? Fine. Ask away. Sally exhaled, visibly relieved. Thank God. We've been going in circles. Her first question came fast. So, how do you know Amelia? With a long, steady breath, I said it. She's my wife. Sally blinked. Your wife? 20-something years. We never divorced, unless she filed something I don't know about. As far as I'm aware, we're still legally married. The color drained from her face. She looked like she just heard the punchline to a joke she didn't get. What was her maiden name? Connor, I answered simply. Amelia Connor. Sally didn't even try to hide her shock. Oh my God! She sat back, hands limp in her lap, staring at me like I'd just cracked open a secret vault. And before she could say more, Betsy, grinning from ear to ear, came rushing over. Her excitement was obvious, and her loud arrival drew a few curious stares from nearby tables. I didn't know what to feel, part embarrassment, part joy, when Sally stood up from the booth and kissed Betsy right on the lips. It wasn't shy or awkward. It was full of excitement, like she couldn't contain it. Then she slipped off toward a quiet corner of the diner, already pulling out her phone. Betsy leaned in, cheeks flushed. I haven't seen her this excited in 5 years, she whispered with a smile. She said she had to get back to her car and back to work. I shook her hand and told her it was a pleasure meeting her. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, like the storm had worn itself out for now. But before I could reach my car, Sally caught up with me and grabbed my arm. You can't leave just yet, she said, firm and steady. You need to talk to Kevin. I sighed. Can it be quick? I'm not too keen on digging up more of the past. She nodded, but didn't let go. It won't take long. Curiosity won out over my exhaustion. When's Kevin supposed to show up? I asked. He'll meet us at my house. All right, I said. You want to ride with me or follow? I'll take my Jeep, she replied. You can follow behind. Her Jeep was old, beat up, and probably had more stories than a small-town bar. Still, I stuck behind her on the winding gravel road. We drove for a while through fields and thick trees until we pulled up to a weather-worn house nestled in what used to be a yard but now looked like a gravel pit. I did my best not to track mud everywhere, but it wasn't easy. There weren't any other vehicles around, so I figured Kevin hadn't arrived yet. Inside, the house had a simple, practical layout. Right by the entrance was a spot for hanging up wet coats and muddy boots, clearly a routine around here. But once I stepped further in, the place didn't feel like a home. It looked more like a makeshift classroom. Desks, computers, schoolbooks everywhere. No coffee table. No couch. Just function over form. As I stood there, I felt 3 sets of eyes on me. Sally's boys. She introduced me to them without hesitation. Boys, this is Mr. Connor. He's here to help your Uncle Kevin. She pointed them out one by one. That's Tracy, he's the oldest. Then Tyler, and little Tanner. The 3 of them nodded politely. I smiled back, amused. So, all their names start with T, huh? I said with a chuckle. That's funny, I've got 2 sons, Alvin and Louie. Tyler, clearly the bold one, ignored his mom's slight eye roll and asked, Where are they now? Alvin's at Texas A&M, I said. And Louie's headed to Auburn. That seemed to light a fire in the room. Tracy, who'd been the quiet one, suddenly came to life like someone hit his power switch. I'm going to College Station this August, he burst out, practically vibrating with excitement. The questions came quick after that. How long had Alvin been there? What was he majoring in? What's campus like? Sally tried to rein things in a bit. Take your time, sweetheart. I'm sure Mr. Connor has plenty of time. What they didn't know yet was that Tracy had a full football scholarship lined up and was already locked into the ROTC program. Tyler, on the other hand, had been accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. He'd be off in a year. And Tanner, the quietest of the bunch, hadn't made any big decisions yet. Sally kept him grounded, focused on school for now. I didn't ask him much, figured he'd talk when he was ready. Kevin still hadn't shown up, but I didn't mind. The next hour flew by in conversation. We talked about football, school, college life. The boys had good heads on their shoulders, and I found myself enjoying it more than I expected. From across the room, Sally watched. There was a quiet look in her eyes, like she was seeing something form between us. Not something romantic. Something steady. Solid. Like family, almost. Spending time with Sally's boys brought back a wave of memories, quiet moments I missed with my own sons. I hadn't realized how much until I found myself laughing at their questions and trading stories about college. Eventually, Kevin arrived, flanked by 2 assistants. Once everyone was introduced, Sally gave her boys some chores to keep them busy while the rest of us gathered around the kitchen table. There was a bit of skepticism floating in the room, probably about my claim that I was Amelia's husband. I wasn't looking for an argument, though. I just wanted to tell the truth and get on with my life. After sitting for a while, I stood and thanked Sally for the coffee. I told the boys it was a pleasure meeting them and started to head out. But Sally didn't let that happen. Sit back down, she said firmly, leaving no room for debate. The room went silent. She looked around like someone who belonged at a podium, not just a kitchen table. Then she asked what proof I had of my marriage to Amelia. Without a word, I pulled out my wallet and slid an old photo across the table, a wedding picture. The years had left their mark, Amelia's hair was different, and time had softened her features. But it was her. No question. I glanced over at one of Kevin's assistants who was already on his laptop. "Look up Berks County, Pennsylvania," I said. "The civil registry. They've got online records from the 60s to the 90s. Search for a marriage certificate under my name, Liam Connor. August 17, 1979. He nodded and got to work. Kevin let out a long breath, like the weight of a dozen questions had just been lifted. I gave him a small nod to confirm it was legit. "If you want," I added, "you can check for divorce records too. But as far as I know, and I think I know, we're still legally married." The conversation started to drag a bit after that. It felt like we'd covered everything. No one tried to stop me this time when I stood to leave. I asked Sally if it was okay for me to catch a few hours of sleep in my truck out in their driveway before hitting the road. She agreed and walked me to the door. When I glanced back, Kevin and his crew were already deep into strategy talk. The boys gave me a wave, or maybe they didn't. I honestly can't remember. About an hour later, I heard the sound of Kevin's car pulling out. I thought that would be the end of the night. Then came another knock. It was Sally. She climbed into the cab of my truck, wearing a flannel nightgown and that same determined look. She pressed a finger to her lips, telling me to stay quiet. We were far enough from the house that the boys wouldn't hear anything. But Sally didn't want to talk anyway. We just were. Together. In silence. In warmth. We held each other like people who didn't need to explain anything. The space was tight, the bed barely comfortable, but none of that mattered. When she left, it was just as quietly as she came. No words exchanged. Just a lingering echo of what had passed between us. As the morning light filtered through the windshield, another knock broke the calm. This time, it was Tanner. "Mom says come in for breakfast." Inside, it was bacon, eggs, and more of the same easy conversation from yesterday. I was starting to feel okay. Like I could breathe again. After we ate, I asked Sally if I could grab a shower before I hit the road. She said yes with a soft smile. An hour later, I was back behind the wheel. Didn't last long. Just as I hit the edge of town, a sheriff's cruiser pulled me over. I figured I hadn't been speeding, but when the officer approached, he said Kevin wanted to talk again. I followed the car to a local cafe. Kevin was there, halfway through his breakfast. He waved me over and invited me to sit. Betsy showed up out of nowhere with a steaming cup of coffee, and a wink. She knew. Apparently Kevin's legal team was pushing for me to stick around. They saw value in me somehow. I tried to brush it off, told them I wasn't interested. But Kevin just grinned and kept eating. I could have vanished right then, packed up, taken the free coffee, and hit the road. But something in me said to stay. Maybe it was last night. Maybe it was the feeling that this wasn't over. They offered to cover a motel room and meals for a few days. Nothing fancy, but it gave me a chance to rest, clean up, and take care of the little things. I did some banking, paid a few old bills, and even sent out a couple of emails to tie up loose ends. I was folding a load of laundry at the motel when the door opened, and there she was, Sally. "What are you doing?" she asked with a curious smile. "Just folding clothes," I said, giving a sheepish shrug. She raised an eyebrow, half smirking, like she wasn't buying it. I had told myself I'd be gone that morning. I even told Sally the same. But plans changed. Apparently, her brother had asked her to stick around a few more days, and she'd come by the motel the night before assuming I'd already left. The truth, though, was starting to show in her tone, soft, cautious, and uncertain. She hadn't expected whatever this thing was between us to last more than a night, and now she didn't quite know what to do with it. Strangely, I found her awkwardness kind of endearing. It even made me smile a little. After talking with Kevin that morning, I'd actually started entertaining the idea of settling down in this town, maybe even buying a house. Kevin made it sound appealing, but I've never been the kind of guy to fall for shiny promises without a solid foundation. I asked Sally to sit down on a bench near the dryers. I figured if we were going to clear the air, it might as well be in a quiet spot. I told her plainly that her brother wanted her to stick around while they figured out how to move forward against Robert. I assured her I'd stay out of her way, and out of her boys, until they'd sorted everything out. I said I never meant to make her uncomfortable or complicate her life. She shook her head and told me the boys actually liked me, a lot. She said they'd been asking when I'd be back and were a little bummed to hear I was leaving. Tyler even asked if she'd talk to me about staying longer. I apologized if I'd stirred anything up. I told her that being around those boys reminded me of my own sons, and it made me feel at home, easier to connect than I'd expected. Sally nodded and admitted she hadn't exactly kept things simple either, not after sneaking into my truck the other night. She looked at me and asked quietly, "Why did you come to me?" She explained that it had been 5 years since she lost her husband, 5 long years without comfort, without connection. And in that brief moment, she said it had just felt right. A chance for something meaningful. Especially since, by all accounts, I was supposed to be gone the next morning. That flicker in her eyes came back, and she asked me again, why hadn't I left? I didn't have a good answer. Instead, I handed her a stack of folded laundry, underwear, of all things, and quietly gathered the rest of my stuff to head back to my room. Making love in a real bed again was a different kind of comfort, more convenient than a cramped truck cab, sure, but what really got to me was sharing a shower afterward. That small, intimate moment somehow meant more than the rest. By the end of that first week, all 3 boys had gotten hoodies and t-shirts from Texas A&M and Auburn. Sally kept one of the oversized Auburn shirts for herself, and she looked great in it. I stayed mostly out of the political drama. Kevin and his people were managing just fine without me. But then everything shifted. The news about Amelia exploded. The media spun her story like it was tabloid gold. Robert's camp tried their best to sweep it under the rug or brush it off, but the damage was done. His approval ratings dropped like a rock. I stayed on the sidelines, didn't want to get involved. Until one morning, a knock at my motel room changed that. Standing there was a tall, fair-haired woman with perfect posture. Even though I was still in my boxers, I waved her in while counting out a pile of $500 bills. She avoided eye contact, but I didn't take my eyes off her. She was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, white blouse, black heels, pure business. She introduced herself as Mila, an attorney from Levitt Brothers in Sioux Falls. The fact that she knew my middle name sent a cold shiver down my spine. Trying to gather myself, I excused myself and stepped into the bathroom. As the door shut, I could hear the unmistakable sound of the toilet tank filling with water, loud and clear. I wasn't planning to act out, but something about her stiff tone got under my skin. So, I couldn't resist a small, petty gesture. Just enough to throw her off. When I came back out, she gave me a flat look and asked, "Was that really necessary?" I shrugged with a smirk. "Not really. But your tone made it sound like this might take a while." "I'm just trying to be professional," Mila said, sounding a little stiff. "You missed the mark," I told her flatly. Her disappointment was written all over her face. "So, what do you want?" I asked. "Our firm represents Robert," she began. "We recently learned that your marriage to Amelia Connor hasn't been legally dissolved. We'd like to fix that." "Fix it how?" I asked, already wary. "There are laws in this state that allow for accelerated dissolution of marriage under specific conditions," she explained. "With your cooperation, we believe we can proceed under those rules." I squinted at her. "So you want me to divorce my wife?" She nodded. "Yes." There it was, just laid out like a business transaction. I didn't like the way it felt. "But why do I need this?" I asked. That seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, unsure how to respond, like she hadn't expected me to challenge the idea at all. Truthfully, divorce had crossed my mind before, but I wasn't about to admit that to her. Instead, I leaned back and said, "Look, I'd like a clear and honest explanation. Why exactly are Amelia and I no longer living together?" Mila hesitated, then loosened her collar slightly and gave me the kind of look you give someone before dropping hard news. "She had an affair," she said bluntly. With a coworker. 3 years ago. She left because she couldn't keep pretending around you or your sons. It just became too much. That hit like a punch to the ribs. I'd suspected, sure. But hearing it stated so plainly? That stung. Well, I muttered, that's clear enough. So, what's the real purpose of this meeting? She sighed. The legal situation between Amelia and Robert is complicated. We're hoping to simplify things by finalizing your divorce quickly, for everyone's benefit. I raised an eyebrow. And what's in it for me? She gave a vague smile. Freedom. I chuckled and leaned back in my chair. I don't feel particularly trapped. You'll have to do better than that. Mila tilted her head, studying me. So what is it that you want, Mr. Connor? Are you seeking financial compensation? A settlement? Just tell me. I leaned forward, keeping my tone even. What are the terms of this clean divorce? No financial exchange, she replied. No division of property, no custody battles, just a clean break. You each leave with what you currently have. Nothing more, nothing less. That caught my attention. And how long would this take? Less than 90 days, she said. It'd be finalized before the election. We locked eyes. We both understood what that timeline meant for Robert's campaign. I suppose I should talk to Amelia about this, get some closure, I offered. Mila shook her head. We'd prefer if you didn't. I paused, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll go along with it. But on one condition, you cover my food and lodging until it's done. A smile crept onto her face, relieved, maybe even impressed. Of course, she said. That's more than reasonable. She promised to have the paperwork drawn up and sent over that same afternoon. Apparently, her firm didn't expect any hiccups. I wasn't represented legally, which gave me pause. Before signing anything, I figured I'd run it by Kevin first. Just in case. I asked Mila for her contact details, explaining that if my lawyer ran into any issues, I'd reach out. But if she didn't hear from me, she should just bring the documents directly. With that handled, I actually felt lighter. Like a weight had been lifted. I walked her to the door, but just as she was leaving, I spotted Sally across the parking lot. Before I could wave, she jumped in her Jeep and drove off. That stung a bit. I cleaned up, threw on some clothes, and headed to Belly Up. Betsy was behind the counter, as usual, and poured me a cup of coffee, but she wasn't her usual cheerful self. She gave me a look that said, "You've got some explaining to do. Can I at least tell my side of the story?" I asked. She shrugged. "Ain't my business," she said. "But if you're gonna talk, you better make it a good one." Breakfast with Sally wasn't much better. The food was hot, but the air between us was downright frosty. I ate fast, called Kevin right after, and luckily caught him on the phone while he was out of town. We talked for 20 minutes. To my surprise, he was totally on board. He thought the whole situation was working out perfectly, and told me I should go along with it. "Just make sure you get copies of everything," he added confidently. I asked if he could smooth things over with Sally, and he chuckled before hanging up. There was a car wash not far off Highway 90, so I drove there next. Spent over an hour scrubbing the car down, vacuuming every crevice, waxing it until it gleamed. Sure, I could have paid someone to do it, but I needed the therapy. I needed the motion. For lunch, I hit Cracker Barrel, hoping to avoid Betsy, who'd started parking her car directly outside my motel room door like a gatekeeper. But when I returned, Sally was there, standing next to her Jeep, looking, well, rattled. Kevin must have called her. She walked up and apologized, really apologized, said she hadn't handled things right and admitted she jumped to conclusions. Guilt, I've learned, sometimes leads people to the right place. By the time Mila returned with the divorce paperwork, Sally had already left. Mila also handed me a check for 10 grand. I blinked at it, stunned. Robert's campaign was collapsing, but my divorce was zipping through the system like a greased pig at a rodeo. Tracy had settled in at College Station, staying with a buddy. The timing couldn't have been better. My divorce became official just days before the election. Kevin won big and personally thanked me. He even promised to pay me back. Only if you introduced me to your sister, I joked. Sally, who was standing nearby, playfully nudged my arm with a smile. After the election, Amelia's story took a nosedive. Bigamy charges came out of nowhere, and just like that, she vanished again. That was her thing, I guess. Disappearing. I never saw or heard from her again. I ended up selling the truck and used the money to buy a house next to a small gravel pit near Hiron. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Sally and I got married at Christmas, and all 5 of my boys showed up. Alvin and Louis stood beside me, Tracy wore a sharp suit, and even Tanner smiled through most of the ceremony. Betsy moved into a 2-story trailer nearby and swore she'd watch over the place like it was her own. Then came the ultrasound news. We were having a girl. So naturally, I asked everyone for name ideas, something starting with the letter T.